Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome. I'd like to say Akwaba. My name is Ann Saki, and I am the Director of Marketing for the Ghana Climate Innovation Center in Accra. On behalf of Ruka Sanusi, our Executive Director, and our partners at Halcyon, I'm thrilled to welcome you today to the immersive panel discussion, Accelerating Growth for Greater Climate Impact, the Imperative of Scalable Innovation in Africa.
My name is Dan Barker. I'm President and CEO here at Halcyon. And what we do every day is support innovators from across the globe. We're focused on solving solutions in climate, health, and equity tech in all of the areas in between. It's why we immediately said yes when Ruka reached out about coming to DC and having this important conversation. Since our earliest days, we've supported founders from across the continent, but I often say Halcyon kind of fell into Africa accidentally. Africa found us, right? And so we are now at the point where African founders represent by far the largest group of founders who apply from any of our programs. And we run programs both here in the US, across Sub-Saharan Africa, as I mentioned, and Latin America and the Caribbean, and the Middle East and North Africa. But we see the strength every day of African entrepreneurship and its ability to solve pressing challenges. We also support founders, some of whom are in the room, who are from the diaspora, who are also supporting climate innovations here in the US. So Kabi, I'm gonna call you out as the Ghanaian American in the room. And we also work with a number of partners globally to support, as I mentioned, climate innovators. And in particular, I want to note Avery, who's here from the State Department and the Coalition for Climate Entrepreneurship, that we worked in partnership to launch a climate innovation hub in Nairobi at the end of last year, actually right around this time last year, to support entrepreneurs from across the continent, as well as Kenyan entrepreneurs who are focused on climate innovation.
First of all, it's lovely to see all of you here. I know how busy this week is for most of us with the World Bank and IMF annual meetings, and we don't take it for granted that you chose to be here this morning. So very, very grateful for your commitment. Apart from being a business incubator, really I like to speak about our work as being the bottom-up approach to business climate action. Globally, small and growing businesses contribute to about 70 or 80% of global GDP. And in Ghana, SMEs represent 91% of businesses that are registered, 86% of the workforce, and at least 70% of GDP. And we know that the business sector is one of the highest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, just because of the way that we grow the food that we eat, the way that we manufacture the clothes that we wear, we cool our homes, we heat our homes, et cetera, et cetera. So if you really want to do anything around business climate action, you can't ignore the small and growing business sector. But our work also involves some there's a top-down approach in the policy work that we do. So we can provide all the support that we want to entrepreneurs, whether that's through financing, because grant financing is one of the things that we provide to entrepreneurs, grant finance and business advisory services. But if the legal and regulatory environment is not right, it can actually diminish the contributions that we're trying to make for business climate action. So we also have a work stream, policy advocacy for a green economy, that we focus on trying to influence government policy, particularly fiscal policy, to be more supportive. I thought it would be good for Mike to just give us a little bit of some background on the genesis and the purpose of the establishment of CICs. So some of you may know that there's a CIC in Kenya, there was one in Ethiopia, there's one in Hanoi, there's one in South Africa, there's one in Nigeria. So Mike, what did you guys really want to achieve, and how do you think all of those CICs and the affiliate tech hubs across the world have fared in the last couple of years? Yeah.
So I mentioned it briefly, but big impetus behind setting up the climate technology program. So the climate technology program was kind of conceived at InfoDev, and then it was discussed with various governments. And the concept was, look, there's there's a huge amount of funding coming in for climate change. But a lot of that money is going to basically businesses from Denmark or Spain or other places where they're producing windmills, and then they have project developers that go in and they set up a big solar farm in Ghana or South Africa. And at the end of the day, the funding, though it's intended to help the developing world, ends up with a lot of wealthy companies and wealthy countries. So the idea was, how can we try to take advantage of this funding to actually not just mitigate climate change, but actually to benefit development. And because InfoDev was focused on entrepreneurship and small businesses, the idea was like, okay, how can we get these businesses in these countries to actually participate in this? And so it was direct business support, it was policy action, it was technology development support, it was access to markets, and all this was meant to come together in these climate innovation centers, which I think it has well in Ghana. We set up, I think, 8 around the world, and 4 to 5 are still going.
We've been really lucky to support climate innovators who are covering the spectrum of climate, and whether that's mitigation, resilience, adaptation. So I'll speak of a few examples. One actually coming out of Ghana, Farmio, really saw the need, particularly in northern Ghana, to address the fact that already a dry climate, already with one growing season, and of course all of that being exacerbated by the climate crisis. So they were looking to tackle the problem, and they're doing it kind of in 2 ways. One, they're building greenhouses, right, making it easier for folks to grow in different seasons. And then 2, enabling farmers to have access in their hands, whether you're using a smartphone or SMS, to key data that they need in order to maintain those greenhouses, get access to the right inputs, manage water and all those things appropriately. It really demonstrates the standard to which African startups are held to. Right? I think we're often expected to clap for American startups that are doing $10,000 in revenue, right? And to see that level of revenue in a difficult environment is pretty incredible.
Many climate solutions are developed by small businesses. Most of the financial ecosystem, particularly the financial ecosystem in the development finance space, does not go all the way to the ground and definitely doesn't go small. So for the World Bank to kind of step out and really step up or kind of set up these innovation centers, that's fantastic. We probably need hundreds more of them everywhere, right?
Yes.
All climate action is local. All climate solutions are in a local context, particularly as the world gets warmer and the impacts are kind of felt more acutely at the local level. We can talk about heat, which a lot of people feel, but storms, droughts, water stress, all of those things are quite local. So solutions to those things need to be born from the context that people live in. The other thing is that you mentioned, Ruka, in your comments, you mentioned 91% of the Ghanaian kind of business community is in SMEs. I would posit that probably is reflected in a lot of countries around the world. Small businesses get stuff done. I would say more importantly, particularly for entrepreneurs who are on their first ride, how do you grow a business? You have a good idea to solve climate change, but getting to the revenues that can enable you to scale is not obvious. Sometimes people with a good idea are engineers, but they've never managed a team. They've never run payroll. They've never leveraged internally for growth. It's not easy to build a small business, but with a lot of grit, you can get so far. But actually, to build a thriving, successful business, you need a whole bunch of other skills. A lot of incubators can provide that and should be providing that, because that's the part that is not really kind of obvious to a lot of first-time entrepreneurs. You do that, then you can start to build scale. You could start to build kind of companies that can serve wider parts of the market, maybe go outside their country, go regional. Wouldn't it be great kind of if they became global? Those are the types of things that you can start to envision from a growth perspective. We spend a lot of time talking about things like NDCs, things like good regulatory environment. All of these things sit at a very macro level. But what they don't do is issue spot and fill in the gaps in terms of the financing ecosystem that can follow an entrepreneur through its growth. I think we need more equity on the ground. Equity is a very specific thing for country contexts. How do you invest in and exit out of an equity investment? Depends on where you're investing, right? Doing it in India is very difficult, right? This is contextual as much as climate change is contextual. Having that macro level view in the policy context around climate change that is specific to how those companies can be grown is missing. We have a lot of conversation about mobilizing private capital. There's a meeting across the street right now that is about NDCs and mobilizing private capital, and they're talking about institutional investors. Institutional investors have still not moved money into emerging markets, even though we've been talking about, in a major way, even though we've been talking about it for 20 years. What it's gonna take, we already know what those issues are, and yet we still keep talking about it because the dollars seem big, but action hasn't happened. So I would say we should kind of start at the bottom up and build from there. With the action that comes out of the innovation centers, not just yours, but a lot of them, with some of the tools that maybe some of the DFIs can provide, not just the money, but also the technical assistance, and bringing to these incubators the complementary support that's needed to grow those companies, while at the same time focusing on the business enabling environment and the financial ecosystem that can be there when those companies grow. That's how you're gonna see the garden.
For our founders, we've created a few that we've experimented with over time. An important note is that as a nonprofit NGO program, we do not take equity for folks coming through the door, and I think that's an important thing for us. One of the things that we focus on in our program is helping people become investment ready. After they graduate from the program, then we have a discussion about whether or not one of our investment vehicles is the right fit. We also have a microloan fund that's really meant to fill in that friends and family round that many of our founders don't have access to, so providing loans up to $25,000, no collateral, no credit check. We've de-risked the ventures by nature of them having gone through our program. So that's really important for us to have that flexible instrument. And then we also have an angels network of accredited investors. So for those of whom equity is the right thing, maybe institutional capital VC they're not yet ready for that, but angels are a better fit. We bring together accredited investors who have an interest in impact and are aligned with us, and so it will invest in both companies that have come through our programs as well as other impact-driven startups. Increasingly, we're having conversations at Halcyon and more broadly about how do we come up with structures that are fit for purpose for the kinds of businesses we want to see in the world. I think there's folks in our sector, we could be guilty of it, and a number of folks in our sector more broadly, I think over the last 10 years can be guilty of trying to create companies in the image of venture capital versus the other way around. And we actually had a really good debate at Climate Week about whether or not VC was the right thing for climate innovation. Of course, the answer is yes and no, but there's some changes that have to be made. And so that's why we are thinking about some other instruments. How do we maintain flexibility? How do we think about time horizons in a different way than traditional venture might have thought about time horizons? Also, we'll put philanthropy on blast as well. If you are head of a foundation and you get on stage and say that we're all going to die in 50 years because of the climate crisis, but you're managing your endowment in a way that it should last for the next 300. Those two things don't add up. So I think we can do the work of sort of understanding and building instruments that directly support founders. I do think that in this bigger policy context, we have to have real conversations about if we're saying this is an emergency, if we're saying that we have to bring to this emergency new sources of capital, then we have to think differently about it. And the folks who actually don't have the same risk profile have to be able to take the risk.
What do you think, the next actions are for the leadership of CIC, so internally, and also for donors like the World Bank, in terms of achieving greater impact? What should we move on to be doing? What should we do better?
When we started the climate technology program, we had this concept of the CIC as incubator, and then we said, okay, how can we make them sustainable? We'll attach a venture capital arm to it, make some investments, and 10 years later, the money coming back will pay for the for the center.
Yeah.
And we tried it in Kenya and we tried it in Ghana, and it was so far off of what that original concept was. Looking at alternatives, and maybe it's flexible debt, maybe it's equity, but the businesses need much more flexibility than people who come in from Silicon Valley and say, let's get a 20x return in 8 years. And patience.
You have to have funders who have the patience, the willingness to kind of take those bets and lose some of those investments for the potential to kind of seed some winners. And then you need to kind of manage expectations that this is not a 10-year time horizon.
Yes.
Really. It could be, but that's not something that's worth committing to, because that's the wrong kind of that's the wrong perspective kind of going in. The patience is really, really important. I wanted to actually pick up on something you said about investment ready, because I think this is also important.
It's about understanding what is the full range of capital available to you and what makes sense for you based on your stage as well as your business model, right? And in many cases, venture is not going to actually be the right fit. And that's what we're really focused on, coming out with a plan. We cannot promise that folks are going to get on this stage and leave with their seed rounds filled the way Y Combinator can. I think probably they're the only ones that can. But we often see people come to us and they've already taken money and their cap table is already upside down, right? It already looks like a mess because they've given away so much in order to get that very early, those first few checks. And unfortunately, there are quite a few predators out there. And so that's something we're also trying to figure out, how do we intervene earlier so that folks are, again, making informed decisions. And if equity is the right thing, totally we want them to do it, but to make sure that they're doing it in a way that is beneficial for them and their long-term, the growth and health of the company.
I think one of the most valuable roles and functions that the development finance community can play, including the MDBs, I'm going to put the World Bank on the spot here, is local currency financing. This is the biggest barrier for most emerging markets in terms of catalyzing anything, big, small, programmatic, systems. Feels like if that is the only thing that these big institutions can do to unlock different types of capital at the local level, it will be huge. I also think, first of all, there's a lot of debt burden put on emerging markets that is also accumulating. At the same time that climate impacts are accumulating, those climate impacts have economic impacts that undermine GDP growth. This is the same lens you should think about how the holders of the public balance sheet in every country think about economic growth and development, and it should be through climate resilience and the energy transition. I fully respect kind of the need for some countries' growth to have kind of a transitional path to clean energy, but the fact is that we're racing towards 2 degrees.
10 years ago, everything was mitigation. How do we, stop emissions? And then everything was adaptation and resilience. And now everything is titled disaster risk financing, which has to do with these governments that, as climate impacts come through, and sometimes it's climate, sometimes it's COVID, sometimes it's just a big storm. It hits these countries, and there's a huge amount of money that gets shifted over from building schools to rebuilding roads and all this. So one is, the Climate Innovation Centers should think about how they can support businesses that can take advantage of that, because there is a lot of funding coming that way. There needs to be more support that you're doing. There needs to be more local fund managers with local currency. There needs to be local organizations that can talk to the policymakers and say, look, your policy is screwing up how we're selling our product into the market. Change that, not people in Washington telling them how to change the policy that looks good on paper. One is do more of what you're doing. Two, I think the entrepreneurship landscape in Africa has advanced a lot.
Yes.
So when we're working in Nairobi and Accra 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was a lot more of the international founders who were there. They did development studies at Oxford, and they came into Nairobi and they started a business for a few years, and it was great, and then they left. Now there's a lot more African founders that I think understand the sort of game of raising capital and all this. So I think how you can take advantage of where the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Africa has advanced to, and the proliferation of hubs and other organizations. So, find your niche.
I'm wondering can I put you on the spot now, Kobe? Are you ready? Sure. You're ready. Could you just tell us a little bit about your business? I don't know whether your business is actually based in Ghana or is based here. Could you tell us a little bit about your business? Then I want to just try to understand whether the same sort of policy constraints and that we have, if your business is not based in Africa, whether you face similar things, and if you don't, what are those constraints that you're actually seeing here?
I wanted to highlight that patience was mentioned, and I think Halcyon has done a really, really good job providing an extraordinary amount of patience for its entrepreneurs. In terms of the challenges that you mentioned, I will say that there are a lot of similarities between the struggles that underrepresented founders go through in the US and what African founders go through, right? There's actually quite a lot of similarities when I interact with those people. So one is obviously access to capital. The second one is, access to resources. And perhaps the third one, and that might be the most important thing, is, for lack of a better word, I call it packaging, right? So I used to live in San Francisco, and those guys and girls there had a way of packaging businesses that was able to sort of unlock a lot of capital, right? And I think for a lot of us underrepresented founders in the US, for founders in Africa, other markets, I think sometimes we miss the ability to package our story in a way that we can speak to, investors, partners, not just investors, but customers from around the world, and really package our story and speak the same language, right? So if someone really, really cares about IRR and returns and ROI, to be able to speak that language.
We spoke a little bit about this, but I think you've gone to, depths that we hadn't seen, and you've also given me something else to think about as we planned GCIC 3.0. And packaging is a word that we use a lot in Ghana, but not in the very professional and detailed way that you said it. So thank you very much. Thanks. I think there's a lot that can be done amongst institutions like our own to foster greater learning, peer knowledge, knowledge brokerage, and all of that. What are your thoughts on that?
And we are still figuring out how we can continue to best support our alumni. And some of it is thinking about how do we grow our financing vehicles? How do we make it actionable? We know it's not doing more trainings. We've gotten the feedback from our alumni that is not it. So we know that that's not it. But figuring out how we build those communities that are not, some of it's about money, some of it's about resources, some of it's about just getting access to somebody who is dealing with the same struggle and hearing how they figured it out.
Local businesses unlock that carbon credit capital, $900 million on the table. Are you seeing any of those startups in your CIC? That a question was for your kind. Also, Michael, maybe if you are also promoting that unlocking of carbon credit capital, and if some of those courts supported by CICs across Africa are helping that unlocking of carbon credit capital. Thank you.
Okay, I can start. And the simple answer is yes. And quite a few of our entrepreneurs that work in clean energy and also in the forestry sector, are very commercially minded and are working with, I think there's a partnership between the Swiss government and the Ghanaian government, and there's Singapore government and the Ghanaian government, and a third government that allows our local entrepreneurs to trade with business people in Switzerland and Singapore. So a few of our entrepreneurs are, then they're accessing this, they're leveraging it, but they're intermediaries that support them to make the work that needs to be done a little bit easier, because it can be complex, but some people know we're Africans. We're mastering the art.
Yeah, my name is Benjamin Jeppy Garber. I have the pleasure of serving as chairman of one of the companies in Ghana that was actually seeded by Ghana Climate Innovation Center. Also happy to be sharing that last year we saw revenue growth of which was quite significant for us and made about 1.3 million USD.
Congratulations.
But
Great. Let's translate.
and a lot of that has to
Translate.
translate. And so that has a lot to do with stewardship and the guidance from RUCA. So thank you. On the issue of essentially monetizing carbon credits, we've actually been in discussions with one of the groups, South Pole, and they essentially find projects that in Africa where you can monetize carbon credits. And we've been having discussions, Translite's been having discussions with them, and we are in the process of actually now being able to monetize carbon credits we're generating from some of the projects we are overseeing in Ghana. That's something you probably didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm going to be. We just received the final thumbs up 24 hours ago.
Oh, well done.
So the question I have is, looking outward. These are individuals who, okay, I've developed a utility scale solar project. I have an opportunity to exit to now replicate what I've just done. What sort of support is there for someone with a track record, is starting over again, has some equity, but is now considered as a pure startup, but has this enviable track record? What roles can the World Bank play? And what role can you play in that type of opportunity?
I can popcorn a few things. I'll start with where you ended and where you picked up, which is project development. I would agree that being a tried and true successful entrepreneur and developer helps when you're going to do a second project. And that having that track record is useful for big project finance, banks and investors and things like that. I also, among the many hats I'm wearing at the moment, I'm sitting on the board of something called the Green Guarantee Company, and we provide credit enhancing guarantees for projects in the Global South so that you can access institutional capital or markets. So come talk to me.
Yeah.
The chair of the board and the group are here in town this week. I'd be very happy to connect you with them for your infrastructure fund. On the carbon markets, I wish JP was still here. I think he had to take a call. If he comes back, you should talk to him. We have slightly different views and perspectives on the carbon markets. He's been an early mover in that space, kind of from before 2000. There's a lot of volatility right now, and it's a credibility issue. And so regardless of whether you get in because it's a useful revenue stream, if you've got credits to sell or not, you have to be prepared to go the extra mile on high integrity verification. And that's not going to be without its cost. And just like the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act will be responsible for birthing a bunch of lawyers who do tax credit structuring, carbon markets, because of the volatility and the craziness right now, is birthing a bunch of people who think they can solve that problem.
Yeah.
Diligence them well. Maybe they can. If they've had a track record, there's some people who've been in the industry for a really long time who actually know the great questions to ask. So it's not just solving the problem, but there's some really important, very in the weeds, detailed questions to be asked about this stuff. But high integrity and credibility is where you got to focus for now. This is like a post-Enron experience. You are only going to gain that back by walking the talk.
If I could just add to that, one of the things when we were funded by the World Bank and Mike was working with us, we had a program that we called the Peer Exchange and Knowledge Brokerage. And so every incubatee business, their founder or co-founder had an opportunity to spend a week with a similar business, which is like, been doing it for 25, 30 years, been doing that particular venture, to spend a week with them, whether they were in India, whether they were in Germany, whatever. And the idea was that it's sort of like a rapid mentorship so that you could see potentially what the future looks like, right, for your business. So brokering knowledge from them. Or if it was the case that you were really, still a very early stage and you wanted to present a research paper or something, at some important conference or whatever it was, we would fund that. And I think that's something that, our entrepreneurs, really, really benefited from. And perhaps if you could broker, such, rapid mentorship programs, I think it would be really, really beneficial.
You have to know your audience. I really enjoyed the comment over here about packaging and messaging. That's what we were talking about yesterday.
Yeah.
If you're talking to somebody who you already know wants to get in and out of their investment in 10 years, you've got to figure out how to have a solution for that. But there's a lot of money, patient money, philanthropic money, early stage money, DFI money, that should be able to be more patient by virtue of the type of money that it is, right? And to the extent that that's true and you're putting that money into wherever you're investing, whatever it is that the project is, whether it's a startup company, an entrepreneur, or a project that you're developing, you need to articulate what that patience means in terms of time horizon.
Entrepreneurs offer a bottom-up approach to climate action. We know this, but I think that's a really succinct phrasing. Huge money is coming into capital. We've been hearing this for a while, but I hope it finally is. And I think we need to work very hard to ensure that it is bottom-up focused. And I particularly liked your comments, Dan, about some of the contradictions and the phrasing of the emergency. This is hard work we're doing. You need a lot of grit and a lot of fortitude. And I think there's a lot of, hearing everybody's stories and the entrepreneurs, you're seeing that firsthand. And I wanted to then reflect a little bit about the video that we saw in the beginning about GCIC. And one of the things that captivated me from the beginning when I met Ruka and I learned about GCIC was their data and all the tracking of the data. And this was in the program that you guys designed on purpose. And so I wanted to just connect that data, make a point on it, but I also, as a good board chair, always wanting to push forward for a little bit of a challenge for Ruka. In watching this and listening to discussion and thinking about the bottom-up approach, I really wanted to challenge Ruka and GCIC, but all of us, to expand the data we're tracking. It's not just about the carbon reductions, but if it's about the people, how can we start looking at this and looking at the human factor, the wellness, the livelihood, the health, the disaster-related indicators, and really bringing those to the story. It might be the hard data, something you can track month to month. It may be the stories that we need to bring forward. But to me, in some of the work I've done, that's what's helped a little bit of the contradictions in defining the emergency. But that's all I wanted to say. And again, thank you to everyone who showed up and to all of our speakers. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.